Okay, Dr. J. Smith back in my office again, back in my studio where I can talk to you. I prefer doing it here than in the other places that I have been traveling, and I have been doing an awful lot of traveling, unfortunately, here in the United States, not overseas, and in a car, so it's a lot more safe when you're in a pandemic. But we've been going through an awful lot of material that we researched on the Qira'at. And you remember we talked about the Qira'at. We have been doing and unpacking it, looking at it, trying to come to terms with it because of the two scholars, Dr. Shabir Ali on May 19th and also Dr. Yasser Qadi on the 8th of June, a little over 2 months ago, who made really terrific. Well, they gave terrific admissions. Both of them admitted that there was more than one Quran. Dr. Shabir Ali tried to strenuously respond by saying, yes, but they don't change any doctrine. They don't change any practice or belief. And I've been putting up video after video looking at bits and parts and pieces of it. And I did say that sooner or later I will put it all together. And that's what I'm going to be doing now. I want to really put it all in one piece, all in one video before I move on to the 7th century and the early 8th century, going into the manuscripts. Before I get into that material, I would really like to finish off this discussion concerning the Qira'at and the Ahruf. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation like I do whenever I teach my seminars. So this will show it. It'll be more visual. You'll be able to follow it. I'll have graphs on it. You'll see timelines, some of which you will recognize from past videos, but it's all going to be in one video here, in one place, so you can look at it all at one time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start the PowerPoint. So, the Qira'at conundrum is what I call it, assessing the many Qira'at Qur'ans by myself that I just finished in July, though we're in August. So, what are the 10 areas we will investigate in this talk? Well, the first one we're going to talk about is what modern Muslim leaders claim. You've seen this before. I've already talked about it, but I want to go back to it just so we know what the claims are being made today by the modern scholars. Then we're going to look at the diacritical variants. We're looking at the 30 official ones and define what they are, because many of you probably don't even know what we're talking about. We're then going to go into the 30 official variant Qurans, and we're going to look and see where they came, what their dates were. I've got a few of them here. I'm going to show you some of them. From there, we'll move to how the Qira'ats were formed historically. What is it that we now know here in 2020, in August. And then we're going to look at a question that came up, and that is, were there more than 30 Qira'ats? More than the 30 that are official. And look, from there we'll move to some of the variants. I've chosen a few here. I don't want to choose too many because we have, goodness sakes, there have been, the team there in London has now found 93,000 variants. There's no way anybody has looked at all those 93,000. Though they have tabulated them, nobody has had time. So I'm just going to pick a few of them just to show you what we're talking about, what we mean by variants, and also to help you understand that when we're talking about variants, these are not insubstantial. They are quite substantial, and some of them actually change the meaning, and in some cases change the theology, despite the protests from people like Dr. Shabir Ali against that. Nonetheless, I'll let you decide by showing you some of those variants. From there, we'll be moving into two of the most popular Qira'ats, the two most popular Qurans today, the Hafs and the Warsh. Now, I've got both of them right here. Here is the Hafs, which is the official one that's used by about 90% of the Muslim world, and this is the Warsh. This is the one that's used all over North Africa. And we're going to look more importantly at these two. Why? Because these two are the most popular. Most of the Muslims today either follow this one or follow this one. They are different, and we're going to find out that there are about 5,000 differences between just these two Qurans. And we're not talking about the translations. We're talking about the Arabic writing, the Arabic text between these two Qurans. From there, we'll be moving into the 1924 Hafs text. We'll be looking at how it came to be, what were the reasons it was chosen, and whether or not that was a good choice. We want to ask how it was chosen and how it was canonized. And then we'll finish off with our conclusions. And the conclusions obviously will go into much more in depth as to what I am walking away with, what I think are the problems concerning this very discussion. So, join me and let's go with the first area. But before we do that, I want to look and see what modern Muslims claim about their Quran. And there are 5 claims. Let's look at them. Number 1, that the Quran is uncreated and exists eternally on clay tablets in heaven. That is actually internal to the Quran. It's found in chapter 85, verse 22. Secondly, that the Quran was sent down to Muhammad between 610 and 632 AD, though it had not been written down by the time he died in 632. We get that from Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 6, book number 61, hadith number 509. Thirdly, that the Quran was completed by the time of Uthman in 652, that was the completed text, and that's what Muslims claim today is the Quran, and that we get from al-Bukhari again, volume 6, book number 61, hadith number 510. Number 4, that the Quran is unchanged in the last 1400 years, and we see that because it says very clearly that the Quran cannot be changed in Surah chapter 10 verse 15 and also in Surah chapter 18 verse 27. Nobody can change God's word. And then number 5, that the Quran is guarded by Allah. So therefore the Quran we have today is exactly the same Quran that has always existed in those eternal tablets from Surah 85 ayah 22 in heaven, that was sent down to Muhammad, that was then finalized by the time of Uthman in 652, and has always been guarded so that it has not changed even today. And we get that from chapter 15 verse 9 of the Quran, Surah 15 verse 9. And as you're going to see from many of the scholars, in fact almost all the scholars, the Muslim scholars would say and agree that it has not changed, it has been guarded, so that the Quran we have today, every word, every letter, some would even say every dot, is exactly the same as it has always been, including that which exists in heaven. All right. Knowing that, let's then look and see what the Quran says about itself. And I'm getting this, and I'm using Hilali and Khan, which is the little blue Quran that I always use. And this is what we read in Surah 10, ayah 15. And when our clear verses are recited unto them, those who hope not for their meeting with us say, bring us a Quran other than this, or change it. Say, O Muhammad, it is not for me to change it on my own accord. I only follow that which is revealed unto me. Verily, I fear if I were to disobey my Lord, the torment of the great day. In other words, the day of resurrection. So there it's very clear in chapter 10, verse 15, that nobody can change the Quran. This is also repeated in chapter 18, verse 27, where it says, and recite what has been revealed to you, O Muhammad, of the book, which is the Quran of your Lord. None can change his words, and none will you find as a refuge other than him. So that's pretty clear in both chapter 10, verse 15, and in chapter 18, verse 27, that nobody has a right and is able to change the Quran. Are you getting that? Let's then now go to Surah 15, ayah 9, which says, verily it is we, this is referring to God, who have sent down the dhikr, which is the Quran, and surely we will guard it. And of course the author, Hilali and Khan, have put in parentheses, from corruption. We will guard it. So it's pretty clear from the Quran, from those 3 verses, chapter 10, verse 15, chapter 18, verse 27, and chapter 15, verse 9, that the Quran cannot be changed. It is guarded by God, therefore that it has no human intervention. Now, let's then go to the first area. And what does the first area say? What do Muslim leaders really claim? What do the modern Muslim scholars say? Some of this will be review for you. Remember, I did this before. Fethullah Gulen, who's an influential Turkish cult leader, he says the Quran's text is entirely reliable. It has not been altered, edited, or tampered with since it was revealed. All Muslims know only one Quran, perfectly preserved in its original words since the Prophet's death, when revelation ended. So it's very clear from his viewpoint that there is one Quran, unaltered and unedited and untampered. Here is a convert to Islam. Her name is Susan Hanif. Maybe because she's a convert, she can be excused. But she says that the Holy Quran is the only divinely revealed scripture in the history of mankind, which has been preserved to the present time in its exact original form. So, she's very clear that it's being preserved today in its exact original form. We move on to Abdullah Yusuf Ali, the very popular translator of the Quran into English language. He did that in the 1930s, and his translation is considered to be the best. What does he say? He should know better than Susan Hanif, because he has been a Muslim all his life and is one of the top scholars in this field. So what does he say? So well has it been preserved, both in memory and in writing, that the Arabic text we have today is identical to the text as it was revealed to the Prophet. Not even a single letter has yielded to corruption during the passage of the centuries. Not a single letter has changed, he is saying. Let's move on. Maulvi Muhammad Ali, influential Pakistan theologian, he is part of the Ahmadiyya movement. He says the Quran is one and no copy differing, and even a diacritical point is met with. There are and always have been contending sects, but the same Quran is in the possession of one and all. A manuscript with the slightest variation in the text is unknown. So he's even going much further than the others have gone and saying not even a diacritical mark. We're going to get into that. That's what these are. But those very basically are the 5 dots that are put 3 above the line and 2 below the line to be able to distinguish one letter from another, which were added at a later date. So he's saying that not even a diacritical mark, not even one of these dots has changed in the last 1400 years. Ooh, that's a mouthful. We move on to Dr. Shabir Ali, a good friend of mine, and he has said in a debate he had with Tony Costa there in Canada, we have a copy of the Quran dating from 790 AD in the British Museum. That's the manuscript, the 2165 manuscript. Folks, that's 1,300 years ago. And we can compare that with what we're reading today, and we find them to be exactly identical. Now, he is correct. It is about 1,300 years old. It's not 1,400 years old. It's a much newer text. And what he is not correct about is the last part, that it is exactly identical with the Quran we have today and has been around for 1,300 years. What else did he say? Well, he goes on and he makes another claim. He says, well, what is important to notice is that throughout the ages of Muslim history, the Muslims have not quarreled over what is the text of the Quran, because the text was known through memory work and through the written materials handed down right from the time of the Prophet Muhammad. As I said, he continues, the 2 copies that were made 1,400 years ago, that's interesting, 1,400 years, one which is in Tashkent, Russia. That's not true. Tashkent's not in Russia. It's in Uzbekistan, for example, has been demonstrated by Ahmed van Denver in his book Ulum al-Quran to be an early copy from that time. And we find no difference between that copy to what we're reading today. That is the Samarkand manuscript he's referring to, that's in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. And he's saying that is exactly like the Quran. So he's made one reference to the manuscript. He's made another reference to the Samarkand manuscript. As we're going to see when we get into the manuscript material, both those are incorrect. Nonetheless, he is saying that there has not been any difference in the text. Woo, boy, he doesn't know what he's getting into when he makes that kind of claim. Dr. Yasser Qadhi is the one that we've been highlighting in the last 2 months because of what happened on June 8th, and he says this: Uthman standardized the copies of the Quran, and from his time up until our time, there has not even been 2 copies of the Quran that are different, even 1 letter or 1 word. Let me emphasize that. So he's saying here not even 1 letter or 1 word has changed. 1 letter or 1 word. Ooh, two. The Quran is the most protected of all scriptures, and God has protected his Quran from any kind of alteration, deviation, miswriting, because he says he is going to protect it. So that's very clear that he is going to protect it. That's in 15 verse 9, chapter 15 verse 9. All Qurans, even up to our time, conformed letter for letter, word for word, with the Uthman Musaf. To this day, there is no different version of the Quran. There is but one Quran. Now, can you see, with these kind of pronunciations, with these kind of references, you can see then why he got hung so easily and so quickly in that interview on June the 8th. Now, let's continue on our conclusions. What do they all agree upon? Number 1, that the Quran we have today has not changed 1 iota since its inception 1,400 years ago. No word or letter has changed, is what they're saying. The Quran we have today is exactly the same as that which is on the preserved tablets in heaven. that today's Quran parallels in every detail that which was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad and was written down completely by Uthman in 652. Thus, no human intervention, there has been no human interference at all. But that is not what the earliest Muslim scholars believed. Now, what is my remit today? Well, we can't really critique uncreated or sent down. That's not really a part of my remit, because we're not there. I have no idea of trying to find things that are eternal, and I'm not there in the 7th century to know whether it was sent down. We can critique, however, complete, unchanged, and guarded. Those three things we can investigate. Thus, what I would like to find is, number one, a Quranic manuscript, one Quranic manuscript. Number two, which is dated from the mid-7th century, around 652 AD. Number three, which is complete. That means all 114 surahs. And number four, unchanged, exactly like the 1924 Hafs Quran used today, and irrevocably guarded. That's what I want. I want one Quran from the 7th century, mid-7th century, that's complete, 114 surahs, and is as parallel, word for word, letter for letter, with the Quran that I have here in my hand, here, this Quran here. This is the Arabic text. I'm not looking at the English translation. I'm looking at the razm, the skeletal text, the consonantal text. I want to see if any Muslim can come up with any. And this is why this is the thing that I've been saying. These are the same four things that I have said since 2014. In fact, I introduced this with my debate with Dr. Shabir Ali. I asked the same four things. And I'm still waiting 6 years later for a response to this. And we cannot get a response from any Muslim, yet I'm going to ask it again. Because what I want to do now is move into this whole area. And what we want to do is look at the diacritical variants. So let's do that. Now, the 30 diacritical variants defined. These are known in Arabic as ahruf or qira'at. Now, how do you define that? Well, let's move on and let's see how we do it. First of all, I want you to look at those two manuscripts. Well, they're just 2 pages from 2 different manuscripts. One is called the Samarkand manuscript on the left, and the one on the right is known as the Sana'a manuscript. Samarkand from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, and Sana from there in Yemen. Take a look at them. And you notice that they don't have any dots above and below the lines. Those only have consonantal text. They are only letters, roughly around 16 letters that existed in the 7th century. Dots had yet to be invented. They had not yet been created. So to look at that as an Arab today, it would be very difficult to read that. Most Arab speakers would not be able to read it. The scholars can, but not the average Muslim or Arab on the street. And that's why there was a dilemma. Because if you only have these kind of skeletal texts, only kind of these kind of letters, you've got to be able to read it. So, let's unpack this and show you what we mean. Now, today, in today's Arabic, there are 28 letters. 28 letters, and here are the 28 letters. However, 6 of them, these ones here, the Aleph, the Kaf, the Lam, the Mim, the Ha, and the Waw, those 6 are unique. They don't need any dots. That's why you don't see any dots above and below them. Those are unique, which means 22 of the letters do need to have the dots to distinguish them, to show them apart. And that's why dots had to be invented. They did not exist in the 7th century. Now, there are some scholars that would say, yes, they have found some inscriptions with dots on them, but very few, but not the 28 letters that we have today. And to be fair, even those scholars would admit that they could have been put in at a later date. So we don't really know whether or not they were. But certainly all the manuscripts, as you saw earlier, the ones that I showed on the screen there, in the slide there, those did not have any dots. And the 6 major manuscripts, the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, the Petropolitan, the Hosseini, and the Sana'a manuscript, do not have dots in them, except some red ones in the Topkapi. And those probably were added at a later date. So that's the problem. You've got to have dots. Otherwise, you cannot read the text. So what are the dots? Where are they? Well, let's just take that one smiley face. All letters usually have a start with that kind of we'll call it a smiley face, but that kind, I'm being a little exaggerated here. When you put one dot above it, it becomes a nun, or a na, N sound. When you two dots above it, it becomes a ta, or a T sound. When you put 3 dots above it, it becomes a tha, or a TH sound. Okay, so there's 3 different letters that you can have by adding 3 different dots. All right, you can get you can see all kinds of possibilities. Now, let's take that same smiley face, and when you put one dot below it, you get a ba, which is the B sound. 2 dots below it, you get the ya, which is the Y sound. All right? So, there are 2 more letters that can be added after the 3 above. Now, let's put them all together. Na, ta, tha, ya, ba. Can you see? By putting and adding those dots or taking them away, you can get all kinds of variations, enormous amount of variations. And so you can see why this is a dilemma. Once the dots were invented, then of course you had to decide which dots go with which letters to make up which words, which make up which sentence, and you can get hundreds, you can get thousands of variations depending on where you put the dots. In fact, if you just take 3 smiley faces together like you look there, see the 3 smiley faces? If you put dots above and below the line, you can get upwards of 19 different words. It could be house, it sprouted, stayed over, a girl or a daughter, she built, stood firm, grew, we repent, he repents, she repents, he spreads, she spreads or broadcasts, we spread or broadcast, he fixed, she destroyed, we destroyed, you destroyed, it was destroyed, or I repented. So you can imagine that by putting the dots there, you can get so many different variations. You can imagine that what would happen when you have different people putting the dots there at their leisure, you're going to get enormous different results. And that is how the diacritical marks began and caused the dilemma that we have today. Now, let's then move on to the 30 official Qur'ans, variant Qur'ans. All right? Once you have all these dots, now did I talk about the vowels? There were 3 vowels as well. The Dhamma, the Kasra, and the Fatha. The Dhamma is the U sound, that's the vowel. The Kasra is the E sound, which is below the line, and the Fatha would be the A vowels. So you have the U, the E, and the A vowel. Those vowels were also added in the 8th century. And so with the 5 dots and the 3 vowels, then you get all kinds of variations, because when you start putting them in different words, they mean completely different things. And as a result, you have an enormous amount of leeway as to how you're going to write your text. You're going to write the Quran. So what are the texts that were then finally written down? Let's look at them, and let's look at the 30 official variant Qurans. Now, here they are, all on one slide. I put them all up here so you can see them, and I put them in different colors so you can by color coding them, you can see why they're important. And to be fair, I'm going to go through all these, but this is actually this list of names I got from Wikipedia. You can get it on Wikipedia. That's right out, open to the public. These are the 30 official readers and transmitters. These are the 30 official ones that are recognized by the Muslim authorities today. On the left side, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are in green. Those are the 7 readers, the most important of the 7 readers. Nafi from Medina, Ibn Kathir from Mecca, Abu Amr, Ibn al-Ala from Basra, the city of Basra, Ibn Amir from Damascus, Asim Ibn Abi al-Najud from Kufa, Hamza al-Zalyat from Kufa, and al-Kisai from Kufa. Now, so you can see that 1 is from Medina, 1 is from Mecca, 1 is from Basra, 1 is from Damascus, and 3 are from Kufa. That we'll get into a little bit later as to why that's important. So look at the dates. We'll be getting into the dates a little bit later, but you notice that the earliest of all these readers is number 4, Ibn Amir from Damascus. He died in 736. That is the 8th century. That is a good 100 years after Muhammad. So it's obvious, and if he is the earliest of all of these that you see on that slide, that means he did not live at the time of Muhammad, nor did he even live and do his work at the century that Muhammad lived or died. So how was he chosen? Well, he was chosen by the man right below it, Ibn Mujahid, who died in 936. That's 300 years after Muhammad. Below that, then we see the 3 in red. That's another 3 that were chosen much, much later by Al-Jazari. Look at his date, 1429. That's the 15th century. So he chose Abu Jafar from Medina, Yaqub al-Yamani from Basra, and Khalaf from Kufa. Again, 3 plus 7 makes 10. I'll be showing this on a timeline so you get it more interesting. I just want to introduce them to you now. Then on the right side are 2 more lists. Those are all in purple. And those are the transmitters. They are the students who come after each one of the readers. The readers are the most important. So the 10 are by far the most important. The transmitters are not as important. They are the ones that are chosen much, much later, both by Ibn Mujahid in 936 and also by Al-Jazari in 1429. So each reader has 2 transmitters. That's why you see 2 names after them. What's interesting is Hafs is the one that we're using today. Notice his name is not amongst the readers. He is not amongst the earliest. He is not amongst the 10, the holy 10, or the major 10. We'll get into that. We'll unpack that and show you the significance of that. So let's go on and just take a look at some of the qira'ats. Now, people have said all the time, and I'm getting this from the response, there is no different Qur'ans. This is all nothing than hearsay. Well, take a look at that picture right there. That's Bernie Powers, a good friend of mine from Australia. He has been in the Arab world. He speaks fluent Arabic. He lived in the Arab world for many years. He now lives in Australia. He's teaching there, and he has his doctorate in this area. And yet, take a look. He has been able to find 23. Those are the 23 that he has on display there that he will show you if you go and meet him. So he has found 23 of them, 23 of the official 30. But I want to show you Hatun Tash's 26. These are the 26 she had back in 2016 when we introduced them. These are the 26 we introduced to the world. Now take a look at them. I'm going to put them up one at a time. So there you can see Al-Susi. There you can see Abi Jafar. You can see Yaqub over there. Here you can see Duri Ibn Amr al-Basra from the family of Kasai, Ibn Amr. There you can see Khalaf al-Ashar from the Al-Durai way. You can see there Al-Layth Ibn Khalid. And there's Warsh, one of the Warshes, Al-Azraq way. Over here is another Warsh from Al-Asbahani way. And then we get Ibn Jamaz, followed by Duri, Ibn Amr, Al-Ala. And then you have the Khalaf, Al-Shatabaya way. And underneath that you have Al-Kasai. Al-Kasai, who is one of the readers. And over here you have Shoba, who is one of the transmitters. Over here you have Al-Imam Abd Allah ibn Al-Qatir al-Makil from Bazi, and over then on this side Hisham ibn Amr al-Bazi, again Khalaf over here, and then Shoba from Ibn Abi, Iman ibn Amir al-Damask from Damascus, and Khalun al-Shamiyya ibn Qatir, he is one of the readers. Warish again, Rao, another transmitter, Shoba, and finally Kalun, one of the transmitters. So those are the 26 that Hatun Tash has in her library. These are the 26 we held up at Speaker's Corner and caused such a furore, and that's when Muhammad Hijab probably saw them for the first time, and he went through a crisis of faith, and he tried to call out all the Muslims not to watch us, not to hear us. Why would he be calling out the Muslims not to watch us and to hear us if he himself did not know how to deal with this? You can see he was concerned by this, and that's why 4 years later, back on June 8th, he then asked about these different Qur'ans to Dr. Yasser Qadi, and you can look and see what happened after that. That's been up for 2 months now. Excuse me, it has now been taken down about a week and a half ago. It was taken down off both of their sites, but we have it up on our sites, and you can see the damaging 25 minutes. I have put a synopsis of it, a 30-minute synopsis of it. I've also have about 7 minutes just of the most damaging comments that Yasser Qadi made in that interview. All of that is available, and that's why it's so important that we go and look at these, because that was something we introduced 4 years ago, which caused the crisis of faith amongst people like Muhammad Hijab, which then caused him to then do this interview, and that of course exposed exactly what the Muslims have known, because almost every one of these names that you see on those slides that I just put up, every one of those people lived between the 8th, 9th, and 10th century. The 8th, 9th, and 10th century. We're talking about over 1,000 years. These names, these Qur'ans have been around for over 1,000 years, folks. Now, here are the 37. This is a recent picture that Hatun sent me. These are the 37 that she has collected. You can see the 26 there. Added to that another 11. So she has now collected 37. Well, you might say, hold on a minute. There's only 30. I thought 30 official ones. There's others, and you'll see why once we get to Hafs later on. Let's move on, because what we want to do now is ask how these qira'ats were formed. What was it that went on? So let's go and let's start. These are slides from Bernie Power when he came on my Fander Films. We did a live stream together a few weeks ago, and these are from his PowerPoint, and he's permitted me to show them. And I just want to look at that right side. You can see the green circled, those are the 7 reciters, or the readers is better known. Those are the 7 that all the Muslims talk about. Those are the 7 supposedly that existed at the time of Muhammad. But look at their dates. Muhammad was over on the left. He died in 632, so there's no way they could be living at the time of Muhammad. So this must be another 7, not the original 7. Okay, that's good. Let's keep to that. There are ones that are circled in red. There are 3 there. Khalaf is off to the right. Those are the other 3 that were added to the 7 to make the 10. And you can see on the right side, those 10 then are the ones we are going to move into. Now let's look at this. I just want to unpack one of them, because what kind of generations did it get to one of those readers? Look at Asim, generation 3. Asim down there, he died in 774, so he died in the late 8th century. How did he get his material? According to tradition, Muhammad died in 632. He got it via Ubay ibn Ka'b and Uthman and Zayd ibn Thabit and Ali. So he got it through those who came through Abu Abdul Rahman al-Sulami, came then to Asim got him. Here's the problem. Generation 1 and Generation 2, we don't have anything from them. Nothing. Nothing exists from Generation 1, even Generation 0. We have nothing from Muhammad. We have nothing from Generation 1 or Generation 2. We only begin with Generation 3. So that's the first of the Qur'ans that we get. And Asim's is one of the later ones. He died in 774. So remember that as I'm going through this. Remember the dates, because the dates are going to show you why this is significant. Now let's go look at this one. Here is Nafi. Nafi from Medina. Nafi died in 785, so he died at the late 8th century. He is Generation 4. So there was another generation in between him and Muhammad from what we saw earlier. Now, Muhammad died in 632. We have Ubay ibn Ka'b, and he is from Syria. So his comes from Syria. It does not come from Mecca or Medina. He goes through those other names for second generation, and then he goes through another generation, a 3rd generation, before it gets to Nafi. So Nafi finally writes it down in the late 8th century. But what happened to generation 0, 1, 2, or 3? We don't have anything. It's all hearsay. It's nothing more than oral tradition. Can you see the dilemma for anybody trying to stipulate that Nafi is one of the readers that gets it directly from Muhammad? There are 3 generations that are between Nafi and Muhammad, none of which exist today. They don't have any. What I mean is none of their writings exist today. There is nothing to support either Generation 1, Generation 2, or Generation 3. We only begin with Generation 4, and then, of course, the transmitters are Generation 5, which come after, and that's where you get Wash and Kalun. Now, what I'd like to do now is go to and show you a timeline and put in the timeline the dilemma that we have in 2 different centuries. One, the 7th century, and then the 8th century. So let's go ahead and look at how the Qira'ats were formed in the 7th century, so to speak, okay? To do that, let's open up to the timeline. All right, here you can see Muhammad was born in 570 and dies in 632. Now, he received the Quran between 610 and 632, and he received that from Jibril, and that Quran would have been the Qurayshi dialect, because that's the only dialect he spoke. He would have not known any other dialect. He was from Mecca and Medina. They didn't speak any other dialect. So it would have been the Qurayshi dialect. That would be the one that would be revealed to him. But he noticed that while he was there were other people who didn't understand his dialect, which is understandable if they were coming from other parts of the empire. And so he says to Jibril, and there are a number of hadiths, I won't go into them right now for lack of time, that he would like to have other dialects so they could understand it. So Jibril sends to him or recites to him 6 other dialects. So to begin with, we had that first Quran, the Qurayshi Quran. But when he asks for these other dialects, Jibril then gives him the other dialects, 6 different dialects, which is rather odd since he wouldn't have known, Muhammad himself wouldn't have known those dialects. He never lived in Kufa or never lived in Basra or never lived in Damascus. These are the two cities in Iraq, the other city in Syria. He would not have known those dialects, so how would he even know how to then recite them? But nonetheless, that's what the traditions tell us. So 7 dialects are then given to Muhammad during his lifetime by Jibril, known as the 7 readings. So now we don't have one Quran, we now have 7 Qurans. Now Muslims will get upset by that and say, oh no, these aren't different Qurans, these are nothing more than readings, these are nothing more than recitations. Nonetheless, they certainly are different from each other, otherwise why would you even need so? Why would you even have to request it? So obviously these must be 7 different readings, or let's just call them 7 different Qurans. That existed at the time that he died, 632. We do know that right after he died, and we've already gone through this before, it's not for this session, but we do know that Abu Bakr then, when he died, had Zayd ibn Thabit, the secretary of Muhammad, write the first Quran, the very first one written down, because these were nothing more than recitations. They need to be written down, because at the Battle of Yamamah, 70 of them were killed who had been memorizing them, and the crisis existed. If you have everybody who had memorized it dies off, you're not going to have any Qurans left, and so that's why they had to have Zayd ibn Thabit write down that one Quran. That was given to Hafsa, one of the wives of Muhammad. She put her under her bed and kept it there for 20 years. Now we come to Uthman, the third caliph. And in 652, there you can see Uthman, in 652, he is having a battle, not himself, but he sends people to do battle up in Azerbaijan, up in the northeast. And the Muslims that leave from Medina and Mecca, who are Qurayshi Muslims, they would speak the Qurayshi dialect, they come across other Muslims who from Syria and from Iraq. And they battle together, but they go to the mosque and they recite the Quran. And of course, the Meccan and Medinan Muslims who speak only Qurayshi dialect hear other Qurans or other dialects and they get infuriated. They even come to blows, it says, according to some of the traditions. And so Hudayfa, one of the leaders, comes back down to Medina and he says to Uthman, what are we going to do? We cannot have many different Qurans, much like the Christians and Jews who have many different Bibles. We must just have one Quran. And so he asked Uthman to write the Quran in just one dialect, the Qurayshi dialect, which Uthman agrees to. He brings Zayd ibn Thabit out of retirement and has him take that one copy that was given to Hafsa, one of the wives of Muhammad, put under her bed, and he asked him to bring that copy and then to rewrite the Quran in the Qurayshi dialect. Very important, the Qurayshi dialect. That means the dialect that Muhammad spoke. That would be the dialect that the first Quran was written in. And that would be the dialect that supposedly, therefore, is in heaven. And that would be the dialect that he wanted to make one Quran from. So he made that dialect and had Zayd ibn Thabit, made it. Zayd ibn Thabit gives it to him. And then Uthman does a very interesting thing. He then takes all the other dialects, all the other Qurans. Now, these have to be written Qurans because he burns them. You don't burn recitations. How can you burn someone's lips or someone's mouth or someone's talk? You have to burn scripts. You have to burn paper or parchment or vellum or papyrus. And so he burns everything that disagrees with his Qurayshi dialect. All right, that happens in 652. Destroys them all. So there are no other Qurans, only one. So we're now back to one Quran at the time of Uthman, 652. Now, that's all fair and well to say, but then he wants to ensure that there is only one. So he then sends out 5 copies to 5 different cities. And there's the map. Let's take a look at what the 5 cities are. He leaves one there in Yathrib, which is Medina. That's what it's called today. Sends one to Mecca. And then he sends 3 others. One to Al-Ulbil, which is now Basra today. One to Al-Hira, which is now Kufa today. And the other one to Damascus, which is still Damascus today. Now, those are the 3 other cities, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Syria, that he sends the other copies, the Qurayshi copies. He wants to make sure that they are Qurayshi. But now, you notice I've got their black circles. Why? Well, because those are the areas that Uthman had the Qurans destroyed. Those are the other dialects. Those are the other recitations. So they would only be black at that time. But by sending these 5 copies up to those 3 cities, look what happens. They are replaced from black to green. They are replaced by the Qurayshi dialect. So now only the Qurayshi dialect will be found in those three cities in Iraq and Syria. Therefore, by 652, or shortly after, he sends these 5 copies of the Qurayshi Quran, and he sends a reader with every one of them to ensure that only the Qurayshi will be read, only the Qurayshi will be used, only the Qurayshi Quran will exist. That's the one Quran that must now be all over, so that it will not have many different Qurans. Okay, that's the dilemma that has been solved in the 7th century. Hold on a minute. We're also told that there were other manuscripts. Ubay ibn Ka'b, take a look at that one in red. That Ubay ibn Ka'b's manuscript of the Quran becomes very popular in Damascus. We're told this by the traditions, by the way. You notice I keep on saying the traditions. I'll come to that. Hold on. So the traditions also tell us that his Quran had 116 surahs. There's only 114 in the present-day Quran, so that's 2 extra surahs. And then there was another Quran that became very popular in Kufa. That was Ibn Masud's Quran, and he only had 111 surahs. He didn't have Surah 1, he didn't have Surah 113, and he didn't have Surah 114 in his Quran. So already 2 different Qurans from 2 different cities, one Damascus, one Kufa, that did not have the same number of surahs as the Quran we have today, 114. A third man, he was from Basra. His Quran does have 114 surahs. His therefore does agree with the Zayd ibn Thabit Quran. Zayd ibn Thabit, who is from Yathrib. But hold on a minute, Zayd ibn Thabit from Yathrib, that one is not corrupted. It is the Qurayshi Quran. So here we have from the traditions that there are other Qurans that are not like the Qurayshi Quran that is circled in green there from Yathrib and Mecca. These 3 are from up north again. Are you seeing the contradiction here? Are you seeing the difficulty here? Because you're getting traditions that disagree with each other. 5 copies were sent to make sure that all the copies in all the other outlying areas are Qurayshi, and yet then we get references to 3 other Qurans that are not like the one that is there in Mecca and Medina in the Hijaz. So that's the 7th century. So a conclusion, from the one Quran that was given to Muhammad between 610 and 632, 7 then were created, well, including that one, so 6 others. So now we have 7 Qurans by the time he dies in 632. And then when Uthman comes to power, and in 652, he then eradicates all the others and brings it back to one Qurayshi Quran, sent to 5 cities with 5 readers to make sure that they remain Qurayshi. But then we get these traditions that seem to tell us, hold on a minute, there are those 3 that are up the north that don't agree whether or not they're Qurayshi or not. It's interesting. Hold on to that, because we'll be coming back to that later on. Let's now jump to the 8th century, because here's another problem. That's the 7th century problems with the Qira'ats. Well, let's go to the 8th century. And in fact, I'm going to put it up on the slide there and take a look at this timeline. I'm going to say it from the 8th to the 10th century. Because what happens in the 8th to the 10th century is different than what happens in the 7th century. Now, we've always been told that these 7 were the 7 that were revealed to the prophet while he was still living, so it had to be before 632. That's when he died. But that's not the names of the 7 that you're given whenever you ask a Muslim about them. Ask any Muslim, and I'll ask Muslims right now who are watching, what are the name of the 7? Who are these 7 recitations? Where are they from? Where do they belong? To do that, to understand that, we need to go to the timeline again. So let's go to the timeline. There you can see the timeline of the Qira'at. Now let's start with Muhammad. Muhammad dies in 632. There you see his name. By that time, we know that there was 7 Qira'at, or 7 different recitations, or 7 dialects. So Muslims have a hard time understanding what these Qira'at mean. And then we know that it was brought back to 1 again, as we saw in the earlier timeline with Uthman. Uthman brought it back to 1 in 652. 652, he brings it to 1 and sends it to those other cities. However, hold on a minute. Take a look at this. Ibn Amir. This is the first of the 7. This is the first of the 7 that is written down. His name is Ibn Amir from Damascus. 736. Look at his dates. Now, I have Ibn Amir here. In fact, let me just show you. I have Ibn Amir right here. This is Ibn Amir. See? Qira'at Ibn Amir. Right there in the Arabic. You can read it. Or if you can't, now you can read it. I just bought this. I just got this 2 weeks ago. You can buy it online. You can buy these Qira'at. They're not trying to hide them. They've been around for 1,000 years, as you can see from the date that's on the timeline. I just bought 7 of these different Qira'at. 4 of them of the ones I'm just going to show you now. And this is the first. So he is the first, and he is the one that writes down the first Qur'an, the first Qira'at in 736. 736, go back to the timeline. That's a problem, right? Why? Because 736, well, that's a whole 100 years after Muhammad. Over 100 years after Muhammad. If Muhammad dies in 632 and he dies in 736, and you assume that he does his work within the last 20 years of his death, that means he didn't even do his work, he didn't do his writing in the same century that Muhammad lived. So this is the 8th century, almost 100 years later, you get the first of the Qur'ans, the first of the Qira'at Qur'ans written down. And then you get Ibn Kathir. Well, I've got Ibn Kathir as well. Here's Ibn Kathir. Ibn Kathir is from Mecca. Ibn Amir is from Damascus. So the first one, the earliest one, is from Damascus. It's not even from Mecca or Medina, but the second one, 738, he dies in 738, and his is from Mecca. So he would be Qurayshi. This would be a Qurayshi dialect, okay? This comes, again, over 100 years after Muhammad. Let's go back to the graph again. And then we have Asim ibn Abi al-Najud from Kufa, for that's Iraq, and that's where Hafs is going to come in. But hold on a minute, let's talk about that later. So there you have Asim, and then you get Abu Amr ibn al-Ala. Now, what's interesting, his is 770, so you're getting quite almost way into the 8th century. After him comes Hamza az-Zayyat. He is also from Kufa. And then we get way up there, Nafi from Medina. Now, he would be Qurayshi, like Ibn Kathir, who's from Mecca, and he's from Medina. They would be both Qurayshi. And then we end with the last of the 7, Al-Qasai. Now, I have Al-Qasai. Here he is, right here. Qira'at Al-Qasai. You can read it there in the Arabic. So, his would be the last of the 7. The Holy 7. The Amazing 7. There they are on the graph. So these are the 7 who are from the 8th century. None of them are from the 7th century. They all begin to appear about 100 years after Muhammad. So when you ask Muslims, are these the 7 that Muhammad received? And they say, yeah, these are the 7 because they're the same number. No, they're not. Take a look at the dates. So did Muhammad choose these 7? Almost every Muslim I ask this question, they say, yes, Muhammad. No, he did not. So who chose these 7? Go to the timeline again. There he is, Ibn Mujahid. 936. He is the one that chooses those 7. But look at his date. 936 is 300 years after Muhammad. That's 300 years later. Ibn Mujahid is the one that's responsible for choosing these 7. And these are the 7 that Muslims think are the same 7 that Jibril gave to Muhammad way back there in 632. No, they're not. You can see they're much too late. But then there's another 3 that are added to that. Abu Jafar from Medina, he dies in 748. Yaqub al-Yamani from Basra, he dies in 821. And Khalaf from Kufa, who dies in 844. Who chooses them? Well, that's the guy that chooses them, Al-Jazari, who dies in 1429. 1429, that's the 15th century. That's almost 800 years after Muhammad. Almost 800 years after Muhammad. Just under. And that's the guy that chooses those 3, with Mujahid choosing the first 7. These are known as the 10 official Qur'ans. This is the creme de la creme, the best of the best according to Dr. Yasser Qadi. And he says this over and over again in his videos. Those are the 10. Chosen by Ibn Mujahid in 936 and Al-Jazari in the 15th century, 1429. Take a look at them. What's missing? What's missing? Well, what's missing is this guy. This guy's missing. This is the official Quran used today. This is the Quran that was chosen in 1924 by Muhammad ibn al-Husayni al-Haddad there in Cairo for the high schools there in Cairo, for the Educational Authority, and then was made the official Quran for all of Egypt in 1936, and then made the official Quran for the whole world by King Fahd there in 1985 in Saudi Arabia. So this is the canonical text. This is the official Quran that everybody, well, 90% of the Muslim world uses. And this is known as the Hafs Quran. Hafs is the man who wrote it. Hafs is the man that created it. Hafs is a man that died in 796. Where is his name on that list? Let's look at that list again. Nafi, Ibn Kathir, Abu Amr, Ibn Amir, Asim, Hamza, Al-Kasai, Abu Jafar, Yaqub, Khalaf. Where is Hafs' name? He is not there. He is not amongst the major 10. If he's not amongst the major 10, why in the world have we chosen him? Why is he then the official Quran for today? And has been since 1924 for the whole world since 1985. There's a problem here. So where does he come in? Where does he come in? Well, let's just look at the back, and I want to just put up Abdul Malik. Take a look at Abdul Malik. Notice that all of these 10 come after Abdul Malik. I'm going to keep reminding you about Abdul Malik. You'll see I have an agenda here, and I'm going to keep slapping him up and down every once in a while on these timelines, because I want you to remember that everything we know about Islam, everything we know about the Quran, everything we know about Muhammad, or the people called Muslims, or the religion called Islam, comes from him. And notice all of these are after him. All of these that you see listed on the screen there are after 692. Not one of them is before 692. Nonetheless, what then are and where does Hafs come in? Or even Warsh come in? Warsh is the second most popular. To understand that, let's go back to the timeline again, and let's look at them, because there are more. There are a lot more. There you have Qalun and Warsh. They come from Nafi. So they are what we know as the riwayat. These are the rawis who come, or the students, or the transmitters. They're given many different names, but they are the ones who come in the family of Nafi from Medina. So they must be from Medina as well. Well, no, Warsh is from Egypt. So that doesn't even work. But more than likely, what you'll find is they all come from the same city that their master comes from. Now, they don't know the master necessarily, because you can see by their dates that they weren't always around at the time that master was living, but they are supposedly within his school. However, the fact that they have different names and the fact that they have different Qurans suggests very clearly that they don't have the same Quran as even their masters, which is in and of itself a curiosity. Let's look at Ibn Kathir. What are his two transmitters, or Qira'ats, where you have Al-Bazi, who died in 864, and Qunbul, who died in 904. That's the 10th century. You can be pretty well sure that he knew nothing about Ibn Kathir, never met him, but nonetheless, he is from the same school, though he has a different Quran. None of his, or Al-Bazi's Quran, is like Ibn Kathir. When you get to Abu Amr from Basra, he has two, Al-Duri and Al-Susi. When you get Ibn Amir from Damascus, he has two, Hisham and Ibn Dakwan. When you have Asab ibn Abi Najud, you have there Shuba, and there is Hafs. Now, I have Shuba here. Here is Shuba. Now, here is Warsh. Actually, I have Warsh as well. And then you can see Shuba here. There is Shuba. So I have Shuba. Those are two of them. And I also have, looks like I have Qalun. So here is Qalun. He is one of the readers, or sorry, one of the transmitters from Nafi. Also, I have Warsh. So these two are two of the transmitters from Nafi. These are the two that come many years after. Nonetheless, these are in the same stable, yet they are not the same. They are not the same. Odd, isn't it? And then Shuba, when you have down here from Asim, he and Hafs are from the same stable, from the same family. They're from Asab ibn Abi al-Najud from Kufa. They're both from Kufa. But they're not the same, nor are they same with Asim. It just gets more and more weird as the further you go on. Let's go to Hamza. Hamza al-Zaya from Kufa. He also has two, Khalaf and Khalad. And then Al-Kisai, who I have here, he has two, Alayt and Al-Duri. Now, if you look on all of them, we now have 21 official Qurans. All right? 7 green ones, and then you have 14 purple ones. 7 green ones are the readers, they're the official ones, the major ones, and then you have 2 from each one of those, which makes 14, a total of 21. But the other 3 also, the ones that were introduced by Al-Jazari, they also have 2. So Abu Jafar has Isa ibn Wardan from 777, Ibn Jumaz from 787. You have Yaqub, who has Ruwais from 853, and Rao from 849. And you have Khalaf, who has Ishaq from 899 and Idris from 905, which now makes it a total of 30 official Qur'ans. There's the 30 official Qur'ans. That are their dates. Notice that not one of them, Hafs and Warsh are there. Take a look at Hafs and Warsh and you will see that they are the two that are most important, the most popular today. But all of them come after Abdul Malik. That's why I bring Abdul Malik up again. You've got to keep understanding why I'm bringing him up again. Because everything that Muslims are looking to, everything that Muslims are really dependent on, comes from after 692. From the 8th, 9th, all the way up to the 10th century for Idris in 905. Chosen by Ibn Mujahid in the 10th century in 936 for the first 21. And then Al-Jazari for the next 9 in 1429. So that is 15th century. So it takes them 800 years to get to these 30. And these are the official 30. Chosen by the 15th century, they're all chosen. And these are the 30 now that our good old friend Muhammad Hijab was asking Yasar Qadi, which of these 30 are you going to write in that blank piece of paper, that blank mushaf? Tell me which of the 30. And what was his answer? After 25 minutes of being badgered and finally saying, I don't want to talk about it. We don't talk about this in public. This is something you have to go deep into to understand. Remember what he finally said? You remember what he finally came up with? Remember what his answer was? They're all the Quran. You just take a little bit of Hafs, you take a little bit of Hamza, you take a little bit of Qunbul, you take a little bit of Ibn Kathir, you just take a little bit of all of these. Just take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from there, even bring a little bit of this into it. Bring them all together, and what do you get? You get the Quran. I can't hold any more. These are heavy, so I'm not going to put up any more. Because can you see the problem with his answer? His answer was basically, they're all the Quran. You just mix it up and mix it up. And what he finally responded with is that any good Muslim will then know it's the Quran. Why? Because the Quran is preserved. The Quran is guarded. The Quran is not corrupted. He just went into that mantra. And that's all that he could say. Because how do you deal with that? Take a look at that again. Just look at all of those. 30 of them. How do you deal with it? Not one of those 30 are the same. Not one of those 30 have the same words. They do not have the same sentences. They do not have, therefore, the same meanings. And in some cases, do not have the same theology. Hatun brought this up a few years ago. This is her graph, so it's a little bit out of date, but I just want to show you I want you to look at those brown clouds over there on the right and just take a look at, there is Al-Bazi. 1094 is printed there. What does that mean? That means there's 1094 that her team has found that are different in Al-Bazi's text from that of Hafs. There you see Hafs. And he died in 796. And every one of those clouds show you how many differences, how many words or letters are different in their text from that of Hafs. Take a look at Hisham, 1300. Khalaf, 2600. Khalad, 7200. Abu Allah al-Harith, 5,000 differences. 5,000 differences. So you can see these are enormous amount of differences. And this is just the ones they've had. So in just looking at 23 of the 37 she now has, just 23, her team there in London have been able to come up with 93,263 differences. 93,000 differences. Folks, that's not insubstantial. That is hugely substantial. That's why, no wonder, Yasar Qadi said this is something that gave him a crisis of knowledge when he was there at Yale University. He didn't know how to deal with this. He didn't know how. He still doesn't know how to deal with this, even after 25 minutes of being badgered by our good friend, Muhammad Hijab. He finally just said, they're all the Quran. What a way to give up. No wonder, he says, we feel like emperors with no clothes on. That's exactly how these Muslim scholars feel today. That's the hole in the narrative. Now, here's another question. Where is the source for everything I'm saying? Where am I getting this all from? Who is the one that actually tells us all this? Am I just making it up? No, I'm not. Let's go back to the timeline and let's see where all of this is coming from. Well, there you got Muhammad, 632. There you got Uthman, 652. I've been putting that up so you can just keep saying it's consistent. There are the 30 Qira'at. I've got them up now. They're all 30 there. 7 of the green ones, those are the first 7. Then you have the red ones, the 3 red ones that come after. Then you have the other 20 of the purple, chosen by Ibn Mujahid and Al-Jazari from 936 and 1429. So where do we get all this from? How do we hear about all these stories? And we now have these these books here. I can see them. You can see I've got them, so you can actually buy them. You can get them online. You can order them. So we do have those to refer to. But where did all this begin? Did this all... where is the source? Where is the source? Well, the first one we get is Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq, we're told, is the first to write down the prophet's biography. So he's the first one to write this down. He dies in 765. How do we know about Ibn Ishaq? Well, we don't have anything from him today. Nothing exists that is written by him. There's no documents or any book or any parchment or any vellum of his. It's this man here, Ibn Hisham, who dies in 833. He takes what he likes of Ibn Ishaq and throws the rest away, and only retains what he likes. So, which means he probably throws most of it away. So we can get rid of Ibn Ishaq, because really it's Ibn Hisham. So I have a book by Ibn Hisham. Here it is right here. And this is the biography of Muhammad. This is what we're talking about. Now, interesting. They say Sirat Rasul Allah, written by Ibn Ishaq. Muslims want you to believe this is written by Ibn Ishaq, because they want you to believe this comes from 765. Most of this, most of this is not from Ibn Ishaq. It's from Ibn Hisham. That's why I put the date 833, and that's why you'll see I've gotten rid of Ibn Ishaq there, because really there's nothing from Ibn Ishaq that we have today. The only extant material is Ibn Hisham, 833, 200 years after Muhammad. Then we also have Al-Waqidi. If you go back to the timeline, Al-Waqidi, he dies in 835. Those are two of the biographies of Muhammad. And then we start getting the Hadith. These are the sayings of Muhammad. And the first we get is Al-Bukhari, 870. And then after that we get Sahih Muslim. After that we get Abu Dawud in 899. And then we get Al-Tabari, or the Tafsir and the Tahriq. Those are the other two genres. The Tafsir would be the commentaries, and the Tahriq would be the histories. So looking there, take a look at those names in blue. Notice the dates. Look at the dates. 833, 835, 870, 875, 899, and 923. All of them are the 9th and 10th century. 9th and 10th century. Why is that important? Well, remember Abdul al-Malik again? Remember I said everything we're going to find out about Islam, about everything we know about who Muhammad was, what he did, what he said, where he went, where he lived. All these stories that surround his life do not come from his time period, do not come from any eyewitnesses. They only begin to appear with Ibn Hisham. Let's look at the Qur'an. So the Qur'ans are 44 years after Abdul al-Malik. The first one appears in 736. But when you look at the life of Muhammad and you look at everything we know about Islam, they don't appear for 141 years after Abdul al-Malik. 141 years after Abdul al-Malik, who is the first to introduce this man, Muhammad. He was the first to introduce the Qur'an, who is the first to introduce a people called Muslims and a religion called Islam. 692, that's 141 years. But take a look and see when it comes after Muhammad. That is 200 years. That's why you must be careful about the sources. The sources can get you all wrong. You need to look at a graph like this. You need to look at a timeline to look and see how late we're talking about. Everything we know about Islam, everything we know about the Quran. The very first Quran that is written, 736. The very first story about Muhammad, 833. The very first sayings about Muhammad, 870. The very first references to what we know as the commentaries, that is 923. The first person to choose these, the first 21 is 936, Ibn Mujahid, and the other to choose them is not till 1429, 15th century, for Abu Jafar, Yaqub, and Khalaf. That's why you need to look at the timeline to see that almost everything we know about Islam, everything we know about how it began, all the important thing about who this Quran is, what it is, and how it was put together is from 200 to 300 years after the fact. 200 to 300 years after the fact. Take that on board. Now, let's go back. And let's go back and go to the next section. Because the next section is, are these 30 the only ones? Are these the only ones? No, they're not. No, they're not. Here's the Qira'ats. Remember Muhammad, there he is, dies in 632. Uthman gets his Quran, puts it together. The first time we have a one singular Quran, the Qurayshi Quran, in 652. So, let's review. Remember the 10 readings? There they are. Followed by the 20 narrators. There they are, along with Warsh and Hafs, who are the two most popular today. Were there more? There were more. Many, many more. What am I talking about? Well, we have a man, Shadi Hekmat Nasser, who wrote his doctoral thesis in 2012. The transmission of the variant readings of the Quran, put out by Brill there in Leiden. and read from page 144 to 156. I'm going to show you what he's been telling us. And there's more that's coming out this month in August that we're going to get, which I can't wait. But Shadi Nasr, he shows us that between the time that the initial 8th century reader Ibn Amir of Damascus created his Qira'at Qur'an and the 10th century, when the original 7 readers were appointed by Ibn Mujahid, we have an intervening 200 years. So that's roughly from 736 to 936. Well, not roughly, that is 736 to 936. 200 years, right? In those 200 years, there were many other transmitters known as rawis, students or narrators or transmitters. We've only seen 20 of them, right? We thought that's all there is, just 20 of them. 2 for each of the 10. No. According to Nasr, there were many, many more. In fact, so many that it became a crisis, forcing Ibn Mujahid to appoint just 2 transmitters for each of the 7 canonical readers. Let's review. Now remember, there they are. Those on the green, the red, and the purple are the 30, right? And then we've always been told that Ibn Mujahid and Al-Jazari chose the 10 readers and the 20 transmitters. That's what we've been told, right? That's just a review of what you've already seen. However, now we find that there were other scholars besides Ibn Mujahid who chose the rawis from the initial 7 readers. Al-Dani, for instance, who died in 1053, so he was just about 100 years after Ibn Mujahid. He had a separate list of rawis, transmitters. For Nafi, he had 4 rawis. For Ibn Kathir, he had 3 rawis. For Abu Amr, he had 2 rawis. For Ibn Amir, he had 5 rawis. For Asim, 4 rawis. Hamza, just 1 rawi. For Al-Kisai, 5 rawis. A total of 24 rawis, or narrators or transmitters. That's 10 more than Ibn Mujahid. So Ibn Mujahid is not the only list. There were other lists. Al-Dani, for instance, died in 1053, writing in roughly 100 years later. But that's not the only. There's yet another scholar, Abu Ali al-Maliki, who died in 1046. 10 years later, he also had a separate list of rawis, or transmitters. For Nafi, he had 4 rawis. For Ibn Kathir, he had 2 rawis. For Abu Amr, he had 3 rawis. For Ibn Amir, he had 2 rawis. Asim, 2 rawis. Hamza, 4 rawis. Al-Kisai, 8 rawis. A total of 25 of these narrators or transmitters. That's 11 more than Ibn Mujahid. So you can see this is not the only list we're talking about. There are other myths that are coming out of the tradition that show us that they weren't even in agreement. But what are these rawis, these transmitters? What are we talking about? Well, Nasr helps us out. And he says, usually they were chosen, these rawis, by the largest number of students who come after them. In other words, they were chosen by being the most popular. Isn't that rather odd? You choose someone's text because he's the most popular, because he has a lot more of these lines coming to him and a lot more leaving him, because not a lot more that followed him. But even those that followed him didn't agree with him. But yet you choose him because he's so popular. That's a reason for choosing someone's text? That is not textual criticism, folks. Textual criticism has nothing to do with popularity. It has to do with which text is closest to the original, or that which is the least deviant. This is what we do with biblical textual critical analysis. We always look at later texts and delineate which of these later texts were exactly like the former. You look at text with text, book with book, looking at word with word, sentence with sentence. And if it is the same, then you hold on to it. If it isn't, if in doubt, throw it out. That was not done with the Quran, not at all. And it certainly was not done with these rawis. Their only concern was how many students they had who followed in their line, and whether any of these lines were single strands, which were then, of course, thrown out. So the question is, how do we know if any of the rawis between the 8th and 10th centuries had anything comparable to the readers they are associated with? We don't, because no one's done this test. And Ibn Mujahid and Al-Jazari were not interested in that. That is not the criteria they use. Their criteria was one and one alone, and that was popularity. Who was the most popular? The fact that they even had different texts didn't even concern them. It was not even a problem for them. And yet you would think if you had let's just say, if you had Nafi from Medina, and he had Qalun and Warsh that comes after him, you would think that the reason to choose Qalun and Warsh is because they were exactly identical to Nafi. They were nothing like Nafi. It wasn't even important, because no one was looking at the text to see whether or not they were the same. Now, Did they always choose those that were most popular? No. What about this guy here? What about Warsh? This one right here. What about this guy? Was he chosen because he was the most popular? No, he was not. He died in 812. And there were others that should have. In fact, Ismail ibn Jafar and al-Musayyabi, two of those who were in the same line with Nafi from Medina, they were also from Medina. They were chosen, should have been chosen along with Qalun, but they weren't. They were much better because they had many more lines coming after them. They were much more popular than Warsh. Warsh was not that popular. So then why was Warsh chosen along with Qalun for Nafi's team? The reason he was chosen, it turns out, is because he was living in Egypt. And they already had these other three that were from Medina, and they already had chosen Qalun, so they didn't need anyone more from Medina, so they went with Warsh. They went with this guy. So he has nothing to do with popularity. He has to do with geography, where he lived. You can see, even that is not consistent. Now, according to Nasser, there was also Al-Dani, also lived and studied in Egypt, and that's one reason why they chose him, because Al-Dani wanted him. Thus, Warsh was chosen because of where he lived. It had nothing to do with his ability or whether he had a better Quran or even if he had a large number of followers, but simply where he lived. Oh dear. So how many of these intermediary rawis were there? Well, were there more than 20 or more than 30? Let's see what Nasser shows us using some of his graphs. Here's the first one. Here's the Qira'ats between Ibn Kathir from Mecca and Ibn Mujahid. So between 738 and 936. So there you have Ibn Kathir, and here you have Ibn Mujahid. Take a look at all those names. What did Ibn Mujahid choose for the two transmitters or the rawis? For Ibn Kathir, he chose Al-Bazi over here, and he chose Qunbal over there. What could he have chosen? Well, if you look at all of them, that's 59 different Qur'ans. That means he could have chosen any one of those 59. He only chose those two and threw the other 57 away. They were all individuals who wrote their own Quran. So every one of those names that you see on that graph there were different students that had come from the line of Ibn Kathir, though they didn't know Ibn Kathir, but they came from his same stable. And only Al-Bazi and Qunbal were chosen because only two could be chosen. That's 59. Let's look at Nafi here and Ibn Mujahid. So between Nafi and Ibn Mujahid, 785 to 936. Who did he choose? Well, as I said earlier, he chose Qalun and he chose Warsh. And the reason he chose Qalun is because he came from Medina. He could have chosen Al-Musayyabi, who you see a little over there to the left, or Ismail ibn Jafar. He should have chosen those two who are further to the left, because they're also from Medina, but they had much better lines. Look at all the students that come underneath them. But no, he chose Warsh. And the reason he chose Warsh is because Warsh was from Egypt. So, 63 different Qira'ats, Qur'ans, that were in that family. All written down. Every one of them written down, and none of them like Nafi. Now, let's look at another one. So now, here you have Abu Amr ibn al-Ala. He is from Basra. And there's Ibn Mujahid again. Which is the two that he chose? He chose Al-Duri and Al-Susi. He could have chosen 65. There were 65 in that family of reciters. 65, but he only chose 2, throwing out the other 63. Now let's stop with one more. Asim. Asim from Kufa. There's Ibn Mujahid there. Who did he choose? Well, he chose Shoba, who I have here, and Hafs, which I also have here. How many could he have chosen from? There were 91 different Qira'at Rawis. 91 of them. Every one of them written down. 91. He threw out 89 and only kept those 2. So let's look at this and let's just conclude with this. Well, we know the Qira'ats between Ibn Kathir and Ibn Mujahid were 59. We know that the Qira'ats between Nafi, Medina, and Ibn Mujahid there were 63. We know that the Qira'ats between Abu Amr and Ibn Mujahid were 65. And we know the Qira'ats between Asim and Ibn Mujahid were 91. Total of 278 if you add those 4 up. If you want to therefore average them out for the 4, that would be 70 per readers. That would be a total of almost 700 different written Qira'at Qur'ans for the 10 Qira'at narrators. We're just looking at 4 of them out of the 10. If you have 10 of them, and they average about 70 per reader, that would almost be 700. 700. Ooh, we could be looking at 700 different Qur'ans. 700 different Qur'ans. We only have 30 official ones, but they were chosen out of 700 of them that they could have chosen it. Folks, can you then see why there's a huge hole in the narrative and why Yasser Qadhi says we do not talk about this in public. Please don't ask me this. Please don't have me put an answer. And yet he was willing to say at the end of that interview that all of them are the Quran. Is he willing to say that all 700 are the Quran? All 700 of them? Can you see? It just gets better and better and better. That's why this is making my job so easy. Let's move on. Let's move on. Now let's look at some of the Qira'at variants. And these ones, I'm just going to go through a few of them. I'm not going to show you too many of them. But I want to show you one here. Let's start with this one. This is Surah 2, Ayah 10. On the left you have Yaksibuna. In their hearts is a disease, and Allah increases their disease. A painful doom is theirs because they lie. The Warsh you have, in their hearts is a disease, if Yukazibuna, which means in their hearts is a disease, and Allah increases their disease. A painful doom is theirs because they accuse others of lying. So, significance. Are they doomed because they lie, or because they accuse others of lying? It seems like the person doing the action is contradictory here. Can you see that's a problem? From Yaksibuna to Yukazibuna. Let's look at another. And here's Surah 2, Ayah 184. On the left you have Miskinin, one poor person. On the right you have Masakina, many poor men. So the translation on the left is, and for those who can fast with difficulty, they have to feed a poor person. When you get to the Warsh, they may effect a redemption by feeding poor men or many poor men. So hold on a minute. For those unable to fast, can they feed one poor man or many poor men? Well, this has a theological problem because as far as a practice is concerned, this has completely different practices. If you just only need one poor man to get redemption, or many poor men to receive redemption, then you can see this would have a huge amount of difference on what practice you're going to do. Which one is it? Which are the one they're going to do? Well, you can see that's a problem. Now here's another one. And this is Surah 3, Ayah 79. Tu'alimun, you teach. Translate, be your rabbiniyun, because you are teaching the book and you are studying it. Versus the Warsh, ta'lamun, which is you know. Be you rabbiniyun, because you know the book and you are studying it. Significance, do believers teach the book, or do they simply know the book? Now many people can know a book but are not capable of teaching it. So you can see here, this has a huge difference in meaning. Also, it would have a difference of theology, whether or not just to know something or to teach it would create you as a rabbi in this case. Chapter 3, verse 83. The Hafs is Yabguna and Yurja'una. Do they seek, and to him shall they be returned? Versus the Warsh, which is Tabguna and Turja'una. Do you seek, and to him shall you be returned? So, do they seek other than the religion of Allah, while to him submitted all creature in the heavens and the earth, willingly or unwillingly? And to him shall they all be returned? For the Hafs on the Rush is, do you seek, and shall you all be returned? So the significance, up to now, the verses are all using they, but Warsh changes it to you. Is this a plural form or a second masculine singular form, who seeks and returns? So you can see here is a grammatical mistake as well with the Warsh. So obviously either the Hafs is correct or the Warsh is wrong, and I would suggest the Hafs is correct on this one and the Warsh is wrong, because it's not only is it not that it's being consistent, it is a grammatical mistake. Here is Surah 6, Ayah 115. On the Haf, it says Kalimatu. Warsh, it's Kalimatu with a Dagar Aleph. You look, you can see the Dagar Aleph there, just above the yellow mark. One is word, the other is words, plural. And the word of your Lord has been fulfilled in the truth and in justice. None can change his words. And he is all here and the all knower. Whereas in the Warsh, it's more correct. And the words of your Lord and his words it agrees. So the significance here is the word of God fulfilled or the words of God fulfilled. The singular Hafs word doesn't agree with the plural form in the second sentence. So I would suggest in this case, the Hafs is incorrect. Whereas the Warsh is correct. Before, remember, we saw the Warsh was incorrect and the Hafs is correct. So here you can see another grammatical mistake because it's not consistent. And it also then changes the meaning. In Surah 7, Ayah 57, you have Al-Riya Bushra versus Al-Layth ibn has Al-Ri Nasra. One is called the winds bear good news, and the other is the wind scatters. So for the Hafs it reads, and he it is who sends forth the winds bearing good news before his mercy, until when they bring up a laden cloud. On the Al-Layth ibn Khalid version, it's, and he it is who sends forth the wind as scatterers before his mercy until when they bring up a laden cloud. So, does the wind bear good news or does it scatter rain clouds? It seems the wind has two completely different functions here, and they don't have their story because it depends on where you put the vowels and where you put the dots. And that's why it's important that you can see these are changes, and it changes the meaning quite substantially. Does it change the theology? Not in this case, but it changes the meaning. Let's jump to Surah 10, Ayah 2. The Hafs is Lasahirun, the dagger aleph within it. The Warsh is Lasihirun, no dagger aleph. So one is, have the people been amazed that we revealed revelation to a man from among them? But the disbelievers say, indeed, this is surely a magician. In the Warsh, it says, the disbelievers say, indeed, this is surely a work of magic. So, is revelation to a man the work of a magician or a work of magic? There's a confusion concerning whether it is a man or an action happening here. Now, you can say, okay, this doesn't change, it changes the meaning significantly, that's for sure. It changes who is doing the action here. But is that a theological problem? Possibly. Let's move on. In chapter 18, verse 86, the Hafs has Hami'atin, which has no dagar aleph, and the Ibn Amir has Ha-Me'atin, which has the dagar aleph. You can see it there on the right, underlined by the yellow. So the one in the Hafs is translated, unto when he reached the setting of the sun, he found it setting in the spring of murky water. This is the story of Dul Qur'an, Alexander the Great. According to Ibn Amir, it was setting in extremely hot water. So does the sun set in murky or extremely hot water? There's quite a difference between dark and gloomy and extremely hot as for when it comes to water. And of course it changes the whole significance of this story itself, because if the sun's setting in just murky water, that's different than it's setting in what it's causing to make the water boil by the sun setting in it. So you can see even there the whole context of what the sun does to water changes depending on which one of these you're going to go with. Now, when we get to 19, verse 77, the Hafs has Waladan, a child. Then have you seen he who disbelieved in our verses and said, I will surely be given wealth and a child. In the Khalaf, however, it says, then have you seen he who disbelieved in our verses and said, I will surely be given wealth and children. So are the disbelievers given one child or many children? I would want to know how many children I get to disbelieve. So that would also have a theological importation as well as the meaning changes. Chapter 37, verse 130. Il-Yasin versus Ali Yasin. One is Elias, and the other is the family of Elias. Peace be upon Elias, or is it peace be upon the family of Elias, according to the Warsh? Does only Elias or his whole family get blessed? I'm sure his family would like to know, wouldn't you? I would if I were his family. Chapter 38, verse 45. Ibadana, now with the dagar aleph, and Abdana, no dagar aleph. So, and remember our slaves, Ibrahim, Isaac, and Yaqub, owners, versus Al-Bazi says, and remember our slave, Ibrahim, Isaac, and Yaqub, owner. Now you can see right away there's a problem with Al-Bazi. Now, Hafs has their three listed slaves of Allah, or is it just one slave of Allah? I'm afraid Al-Bazi does not know how to count, because you cannot have a singular with three different names that follow it. So that's a grammatical mistake. That would change the meaning. It would also change the fact that God did not guard it very well, if he can make that kind of mistake. Now here you have chapter 47, verse 4. Hafs has Kutilu versus Katalu. One were killed and the other was fought. And the ones who have been killed in the ways of Allah, then He will never send their deeds into error. Versus the Warsh, which says, and the ones who fought in the way of Allah, then He will never send their deeds into error. Now the significance is, are we rewarded for being killed or simply for fighting? Given the choice, I would prefer simply fighting to be being killed. So I would rather go with Warsh on this one than Hafs. Hafs is much more dire because it means I'm going to be killed. Not so with Warsh. That would have a theological implication, and you can see this is one reason why you need to be consistent. It's obviously they're not consistent. Someone's changed it. Did Warsh change it or did Hafs change it? Both of them are nothing more than transmitters. Either one could have changed it. Let's just see which one they go with. We go with the Hafs on this case because the Hafs has been chosen. In chapter 49, the Hafs has fata bayanu, verify it, and the Khalaf has fata thabatu. One is verify it and the other is stand firm. O you who believe, if a rebellious evil person comes to you with news, verify it, lest you harm people in ignorance. Or do you just stand firm? Do we verify a bad person's news or stand firm? Verifying news is more practical than just standing still and doing nothing. You can see that has a huge change in meaning. I think that's enough. We've gone through quite a few. Let's compare then the Hafs with the Warsh. So we have the Warsh here, and we have the Hafs. These are the two. Let's compare these two. And let's do a quick comparison because I don't want to spend too much time on this. This is all from Bernie Power's material. Comparison of the Arabic text of the Hafs and Warsh version of the Riwayats revealed many differences. One Islamic website only identifies 51 variations, but the team there in Australia, when they looked at the Warsh and the Hafs, they found 120 consonantal or long vowel or symbol differences which affect the meaning of the words. 120. Folks, I just went through a few just before this. They found 120 of these. More than that, there are over 5,000 short vowel or diacritical marks differences between these two books, between the Warsh and the Hafs. That's why you've got to take this on board, folks. And Muslims who are listening to me, please, please, please do not say there's no difference in the meaning. Do not say there's no difference when you look at what we're showing you here. He goes on and says that the difference in the numbers of letters or symbols, some letters or symbols are missing from the Hafs. I'll show you the columns in just a bit. But included in the Warsh version. Some letters or symbols found in the Hafs version are missing from the Warsh version. Sometimes they have the same number of letters and symbols in a corresponding word, but they are different letters or symbols. So you can see these are things that we need to look at. Let's take a look at this graph here. This is type A that he refers to. Now these are changing the meaning of nouns, and there are 11 instances that he has. Only 9 of them are up there on the screen. So you have one on the owner on the left versus the king. That's the most common one, chapter 1, verse 4. Or a bird versus flying, means of support versus valuable, the peace versus the greeting, good tidings versus proclamation, indeed a magician or indeed magic. We went through that all one. Keeper versus preservation. You can see this changes the meaning in every case. So these are very much different, shows the difference. Here's another one, type B, changing nouns from singular to plural. There are 30 instances that they found here. He's just giving 8. Could be a poor person or poor people. We went through that one. His message or his messages, word or words, by my messages or by my message. The unbelievers or the unbeliever. The wind, the winds, bed or beds, his book or his book. His books or his book. So you can see in every case, sometimes they're singular on one case, sometimes they're plural on the other, or it's vice versa. Here's another category, and this is changing meaning from a noun to a preposition. He made versus maker. Slaves versus with. Now that not only changes the meaning, but you can say in the context, it could also change the theology. Another type, a fourth type, is changing meaning to a different verb. They deceive or they tried to deceive in the Warsh version. In the Hafs, they lied versus they disbelieved. Well, that has a huge significance. I didn't go into that yet. He enjoyed or he commanded. We raise up or we resurrect. He fought or he was killed. We went into that one before, so we won't continue with that. Type E, changing a verb from active to passive. We will forgive or it will be forgiven. He fought or he was killed. That's in chapter 3 again. Are led astray or he leads them astray. And we continue on. We accept, we overlook, it is seen, they are killed, it is accepted, it is overlooked, you see, or they fight. Kill versus fight, huge meaning if you're a person that has a impact on. Type F, changing a verb from a second person singular, you, to a third person singular, he. And here are 7 instances, they only have 6 up there. He sees, you see, you think, he thinks. He saved us versus you saved us. And you can go on and on. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it does get tedious. What you see type G here, changing a verb from a first person plural, we, to a first person singular or second person singular, you, or third person singular, he. And you can see he has arrows going where they change it all over the place. And that's why in every case, it does make the difference. It does change the meaning. In some cases, it changes the belief. In some cases, the practice. Another case, type H, where changing the verb from a second person plural, you, to third person plural, they. There are 23 instances. He only has 22 listed there. Here is I, changing from masculine to feminine. It is watered or it is watered feminine. It is almost feminine versus it is almost masculine. So it flips back and forth between male and female. Now that, you might say, has not too much significance unless you realize that in Arabic it has a huge significance, because if it's always male, if it's always dealing with people, it has to be male. If it's dealing with objects or things, it has to be female, especially in the, when it's talking about the plural form. Type J, changing a statement to a command. This is imperative. You will not ask. Do not ask. Take, according to Hafs in chapter 2, verse 125, versus they take. He said versus say. This is a lot. This happens an awful lot. Say versus he said. The kala versus kul. This you'll find an awful lot in the Quran. These changes, especially when we get to Dan Brubaker's material. Type K, no change of meaning. A different letter for a conjunction with a singular meaning. So you can see that it's no really change in meaning, but the writing is different. And you can see it does change the conjunction. So, and go forth versus go forth. All right, so it's because of this that you can see that people are now reflecting it. Now I just have a picture here of the 26 Qur'ans. I'm not going to put it up again because this will just make it much too long. But when we held up these 26 Qur'ans, and we went through just a few of the meanings, it caused such a furore there at Speaker's Corner. The first time we did it, Muhammad Hijab was right there, and you saw him in the video that we had up a few weeks ago, where he actually went and looked and tried to pull all the Muslims out, and he did. He pulled them out so they wouldn't see what we were showing, and they wouldn't hear what we were saying, especially when we showed the variants like I just did. And that caused a crisis of faith. We did this 3 times that summer in 2016. The third time we did it, we almost did not leave the corner. They tried to stop us. They tried to take the Qur'ans from us. They didn't want us to go to the road. They even broke the handle on our bag. You could see they were so upset with what we were saying and what we were showing. But we weren't doing anything that they should not have already known. Those Qur'ans that you see in our hands there, the ones that I have right here, these ones here, these are all available. You can get them, folks. That's why we're saying, go and get them. Don't blame us. Don't get upset with us. These are your Qur'ans, Muslims. They are on display. You can see them. You can get them. You don't have to get us from us. Don't get upset with us. We're just holding up the Qur'ans that you have published, that you are printing, and that are available even on the internet. So, folks, can you see then? We have to make sure we go and make this public. Now, let's go to the 1924 Hafs canonized text. This is 8 out of 10 of what we're going to go. Our present Qira'at Quran, the one that we're using today. Remember the 10 readers. There they are up on the screen. Nafi ibn Kathir, Abu Umar, Abu Imr, Asim, Hamza, Al-Kasai, Abu Jafar, Yaqub, and Khalaf. Where is Hafs there? You don't see Hafs there. The 20 transmitters, he then finally appears. There he is. You can see where he is. That's him right there. So he comes with the 20 transmitters, which then we have now 30. And he is there in the second ring, or you might say the second rung of importance. Was he a good choice? Should he have been chosen? They had 29 others they could have gone. Why did they choose him? No, he wasn't. Here's why. Now, I have 5 problems. First of all, he wasn't trustworthy and therefore not suitable. Secondly, he was not chosen for textual veracity or authenticity, but for political reason. Thirdly, he came from the wrong city. We're going to see that. Fourthly, he came from the wrong dialect or with the wrong dialect. And number 5, he should have been the last person amongst the 30 to have been chosen for the previous 4 because of the previous 4 reasons. Before we go to Hafs, however, let's look at Asim, his reader, the stable from which he came from. According to what we know, we are told that he received his Quran from Zar ibn Hubaysh, Abu Abd al-Rahman al-Sulami, and Abu Amr al-Shaybani, who supposedly received it from Ali ibn Abi Talib, the 4th caliph, and Ibn Masud from Kufa. Ibn Sa'd said this of him: Asim was reliable but made mistakes in the transmission. Abdullah al-Ab ibn Ahmed said this of him: Al-Amash memorized the tradition much more correctly. Yaqub bin Sufyan says his transmission of the tradition contains some confusion. And Ibn Ulayya said everyone named Asim was faulty in memorizing the tradition. Ibn Khara says his transmission of the tradition contains some deniable things. Al-Ukaili says this of him: he had no problem with Asim except poor memorization of the tradition. Al-Darakutni says this: Asim had fault of memory. And finally, Hamad Ibn al-Samalma says Asim became confused towards the end of his life. So there's not too much good that was said about Asim, and yet he is the reader from which Hafs comes from. Nonetheless, not much is said well about Asim. Let's then go to Hafs. What about Hafs? His real name is Hafs ibn Sulaiman al-Asadi. Born in 708, died in 709, from Kufa. Raised by Asim in Kufa, so that's why he knew him well. Hafs himself said that he did not depart from Asim's reading except in one word, which is in Surah Al-Rum, in Surah 30, verse 4. Now here's a question, before I even get into that. If that were the case, then why do we even need Hafs? If his was exactly the same as Asim. Now, folks, we have Asim and we also have Hafs. We're looking at them. We're going to see if he does, if he's exactly the same. We haven't done it yet. We're still working on it, but we're going to probably have a different view than what Hafs says here. It looks like he does have quite a few differences from Asim. Nonetheless, that's something yet to be done. That's something yet to come out to you. We do know that Al-Dahabi says this of him: Hafs was reliable in his reading, consistent and accurate, but not so in his transmission of the tradition. Oh, that's not good. Ibn Abi Hatim says this of him: his, that means Hafs, transmission of the tradition was rejected. Uthman al-Darimi and others also said he was just not reliable. Ibn al-Madini says Hafs was weak in tradition and I intentionally avoided transmitting from him. And al-Buhari, the famous al-Buhari that we know about from the 870, said he was rejected by the compilers of the biographical dictionaries. And then al-Nasa'i says this of him: I consider him untrustworthy, and the traditions he transmitted were not recorded. Okay, but there's others who had opinions of Hafs as well. Theirs was not any better. Al-Darakutni says, well, he considered him quite weak. Al-Saji says Hafs is one of those whose traditions have disappeared. What he transmitted contained objectionable traditions. Salih ibn Muhammad said his traditions were not recorded and all of them were objectionable. Ibn Kharash says Hafs was a liar and was rejected for fabricating traditions. Ibn Hayyan says he used to change the chains of transmission and even fabricated chains for those traditions that did not have ones. Conclusions? Hafs' transmissions were unreliable, weak, untrustworthy, contained objectionable material, contained fabricated chains, his traditions disappeared, he was a liar, his transmissions were not recorded by others, and others avoided him. To the point that, according to Abd al-Rahman al-Muhdli, declared, I solemnly declare that it is not permissible to transmit traditions on his, that means Hafs' authority. Doesn't sound very resounding, does it? It doesn't look like he was well liked. So why in the world was Hafs chosen as the official Quran if he was so unreliable and so untrustworthy? Well, let's then go and look and see why he was canonized, or his text was canonized and chosen. In 1924, and you've heard this before, so I'm repeating something that most of you know, that's 96 years ago, there was a problem in the Department of Education there in Cairo, in the city of Cairo, because they were getting lots of tests that were coming in from students, high school students, excuse me, who were coming in with different answers in these standardized questions concerning the Quran. And the reason why is because they were having some that were written by Warish, others that were written by Shoba, others that were written by Ibn Kathir or Al-Kasai. So you can see they're getting so many different references and so many different answers that there was a difficulty, so they had to do something about it. So what they did is they went to this man, Muhammad ibn Ali al-Huzaini al-Haddad, who was from Al-Azhar University there, the primary university in the Arab-speaking world. And they asked him to just choose one of these 30, these official 30. And he chose the Hafs. Why did he choose the Hafs? Because that was the preferred Qira'at of the Ottomans who were still in power up until 1924 as far as power, as far as the Caliphate. Not in Egypt, but in power as far as the Caliphate was concerned. So they chose the one that the Ottomans wanted. The other 29, what did they do with the other 29? They took them out into a boat and dumped them into the Nile. They just dumped them, thinking that would get rid of them. Little did they know that you can still buy them today. You cannot get rid of them just by dumping them into the Nile. Folks, they're still on sale in 2020. I just got these 2 weeks ago. So you can see it does not any good, does you no good trying to censor that which you cannot censor. But that's what happened in 1924. Now, I want to show you Hatun's. Hatun has not just 30, she has 37 Qira'ats, all Arabic. Count them, 37 of them. None of them are translations. These are all Arabic. I always said the Burning Power has 23. There you can see the 23. 23 of them that he has collected. So you can collect them as well. These are the variants, and when Hatun has looked at hers, just with 23 of hers, she has already found 93,000 differences. Her team, not her. Hatun hasn't done the work because she doesn't speak Arabic, doesn't write or read Arabic. It is her team that are all Arabs. They're all proficient in this. This is their language. This is also their expertise. They have found 93,263 variants within just 23 of them, of the 37 that she has collected. What's fascinating is that Hafs himself has 7 different Qur'ans. There are 7 Hafs. They have found 7 different Hafs. So even he is not consistent. In 1936, Egypt, the government of Egypt, decided to make the Hafs the official Qira'at, or the official Quran for all of Egypt, for all the schools in Egypt, because it was so it worked so well with what was happening in Cairo. And they call it the Farouk edition because it was named after King Farouk, who came to power in 1936. Because of the example of Egypt there in Saudi Arabia, 35 years ago, in 1985, the government decided to make the Hafs Qira'at the official Quran for the whole world. And they call it the Fahd edition. So whenever you see the Fahd edition, it's referring to the Hafs. That was chosen in 1985. King Fahd, who came to power in 1982. If that is the case, I have a problem. Hold on. Let's back up. Let's go back. Remember Al-Bukhari, volume 6, hadith number 510, which referred to Uthman's Quran. This is the reference we get about how Uthman's Quran was put together. Remember that when we went through this? There you can see it. That's from Al-Bukhari, volume 6, book number 61, hadith number 510. And there you see the reference, what was going on back there in 652. We are told that Hudayfa comes back from Azerbaijan after fighting up there, upset because he has heard different Qurans recited from Syria and Iraq. He insists that Uthman write one Qurayshi Quran and send it to every province, Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa, and Damascus. We talked about that, so that there would be no other Quran, just the Qurayshi Quran. And then Uthman burned all the other Qurans from Basra, Kufa, and Damascus to retain the Qurayshi Quran, just this one. Remember that? Remember we went through this? So where were the corrupted Qurans from? Let's remind ourselves. They were from, remember, where did they come from? 5 copies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Boop, 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 boop. Remember that? The corrupted Qurans were from Iraq and Syria. So the corrupted Qurans were from these cities, Basra, Kufa, and Damascus. Those are where the corrupted Qurans are from. Those are the ones that Uthman had burned, destroyed, back in 652, right? Remember, then you have these other 3 that were then introduced later on. Ubay ibn Ka'b with 116 references, Ibn Masud with 110, and then Ibn Musa with 114. Those are from the same 3 areas, Damascus, Kufa, and Basra. So it's obvious that the corrupted Qurans are from those cities, and the pure Qurans are from the Quraysh, there in Yathrib or Mecca, or what we now know today is Medina and Mecca. The corrupted Qurans were from Basra, Kufa, and Damascus. That's very clear. Let's now go back and ask this question. How many of the 10 readers use the Qurayshi dialect? Let's take a look. There they disappear, and then they come back. Nafi, he was from Medina. Ibn Kathir, he was from Mecca. and way down here, Abu Jafar. So only 3 of the 10 readers were Qurayshi. 3 of the 10. The other 7 were not Qurayshi. You see that? I've highlighted them in yellow, just to remind you. Those are the 3 that are Qurayshi. The other 7 are not Qurayshi. How many of the 20 transmitted were Qurayshi? Well, Qalun, Al-Bazi, Qunbul, Isa ibn Wardan, and Ibn Jumaz. So only 5 out of the 20 of the transmitters were Qurayshi. That means of the 30 official Qira'ats, only 8 use the Qurayshi dialect. Are you seeing that? Those are all the ones in yellow. Those are the only 8. Those are the only ones that are the pure ones. Those are the ones that should be chosen. Those are the ones that were canonized by Uthman. Those are the ones that were revealed to Muhammad. If there's any Quran that should be canonized today, it should be from those 8. Nafi, Khaldun, Ibn Kathir, Al-Bazi, Qunbul, Abu Jafar, Isa ibn Wardan, or Ibn Jumaz. It should be one of those 8. Are you getting me? I hope you're looking at that. I hope you're understanding that. Hafs wasn't one of them. There's Hafs. Hafs was not one of them. In fact, his dialect from Kufa was one which was Uthman burned. His dialect was the one that was burned. So, let's now conclude. I've got some conclusions and some disturbing questions to ask. What can we conclude? Well, Muslims are forced to say that the Quran is perfectly preserved because of Surahs 10, 15, and 18:27, which says that no one can change the word of God, and then 59, which says that God guards it. So you cannot change it. Why? Because God guards it. That's very clear. The Quran says so, therefore they're hang-tied. Modern scholars make claims they cannot hope to support. They are the ones that say that there's no word or letter that has been changed. They say it all the time. Yes, Al-Qadi has always been saying it. Their claims are wreaking havoc within Muslim communities, post-Junaid, especially post that, after that disastrous interview that he had with Muhammad Hijab. There never has been just one Quran, and certainly not any from the 7th century. The fact that Arabic could not accommodate a written text so early needs to be acknowledged by Muslims, and they need to acknowledge this. This is one reason why I've always asked, why would God in His wisdom choose such a hopeless language to reveal His greatest and final revelation if it could not even accommodate the text? Nonetheless, they're not admitting it. Number 5, how could Muhammad receive 7 recitations or 7 dialects if he only lived in Mecca and Medina? He didn't live in Kufa. He didn't live in Basra. He never went to Damascus. So how could he have known those recitations? How could he even known those dialects? And how could Jibril have given it to him? If there was a canonical Qurayshi Quran by 652, where is it today? I'd love to see it. Furthermore, where are the 5 Qurayshi copies sent to Medina, Mecca, Basra, Kufa, Damascus? There should be 5 that we should be able to get our hands on. We can't even find one. Where are all these Qurayshi dialects, Qurans? What has happened to Ubay ibn Ka'b's or Ibn Mas'ud's or Ibn Musa's manuscript? Where are they? Remember, they were written in the 7th century as well. None of them exist. Either that's ineptitude on a grand scale, or they just never existed to begin with. I would suggest it's the latter. The 8th century Qira'at Qurans only begin to appear over 100 years after Muhammad died. This proves they never knew Muhammad, nor even worked in his century. Further conclusions. They were chosen even later, between 936 to 1429, and which is 300 to 800 years too late. Oh dear. So the 7th, 8th century Qira'ats cannot be the same as the 7th century Jibril's recitations. You cannot have the same 7 in the 8th and the 7th century because there's 100 years between them. So the 7 ones that were chosen by Ibn Mujahid in 936, which is the 10th century, cannot be the same as those in the 7th century because it's 300 years too later and they were only written 100 years too late. Okay, are you getting it? Since Uthman destroyed the Iraqi and Syrian recitations, why do they suddenly reappear in the 8th century? They were supposed to have been destroyed from Kufa and Basra and Damascus, and here suddenly they appear. In fact, the earliest one is from Damascus, 736, Ibn Amir's. Can you see? These cannot suddenly appear 100 years later if they've all been destroyed earlier. And what then happened to the 5 copies? Did they suddenly forget them? Did they forget the Qurayshi dialect? Did they suddenly realize that they wanted their own dialects? Can you see? There's an enormous amount of questions that you've asked here. Why are only 8 of the 30 official Qira'ats from the area that Qurayshi would have existed? That's the Hijaz, Mecca, Medina. We now find that there were many more than 30 Qira'ats, possibly as many as 700. 700! Ooh, my oh my. It just gets better and better. It's curious that the Qira'ats were primarily chosen because of popularity in geography. Shouldn't a Rawi transmitter have the same script as his reader in order to be legitimate? I would guess so. So why are they all different? Why is every one of them different from their reader? Why are the transmitters, if they're in the same family, they should have the same text? You would think, right? Each wrote their own unique script with over 93,000 differences between just 23 of them that we've looked at or they've looked at so far. Number 16, not one of the Qira'at Qur'ans have had any textual critical analysis. And this is really disturbing. And this really Muslims need to answer for. No one has tried to find the earliest manuscripts to use as a model. No one has looked at the text of any of the subsequent Qira'at Qur'ans. And that's not all. Still further conclusions. The Hafs, the canonical Qira'at, was not a member of the first 7, nor of the subsequent 10. So he was not part of the creme de la creme, the best of the best, as Yasser Qadi says. His is not anywhere near there. He was unreliable, he was weak, untrustworthy, he was a liar, used objectionable material and fabricated change, so that though others avoided him and refused to use him. He was initially chosen in order to standardize high school exams in the Quran, but only in Cairo. That is not a reason for choosing a text, just to standardize the Qurans in high schools. He was chosen for political purposes. The Ottomans preferred him to the others. Why? We don't know. No one's telling us why the Ottomans preferred Hafs. I would like to know. He was chosen by the Saudi Arabian government only 35 years ago out of expediency. But hold on a minute. Why in the world did the Arabian government, the Saudis, choose an Iraqi dialect as the final text? Why didn't, of all people, they own Mecca and Medina. The Qurayshi dialect would be their dialect. Why didn't they choose the other 8? Why didn't they choose Nafi? Or Ibn Kathir's? Or Qalun's? Why didn't they choose any of those? Why in the world did they choose Hafs dialect, which is from Iraq? It is not even Saudi Arabian. Were the people who were advising King Fahd even aware of this? You would have thought of anything. They would have chosen one of their dialects. They would have chosen one of those from Mecca or Medina. But no, they chose the Kufan one from way over in Iraq. Nowhere in this whole process did anyone use textual criticism. In other words, whether Hafs' text was similar or even close to the original Uthmani Qurayshi text. No one did this. They didn't look at texts. They didn't even open up Hafs' book to look and see whether or not the consonantal text, whether or not the razm, whether or not the skeletal text is the same as the original one. No one did that. Why didn't they do it? Well, the reason was there is no Uthmani Qurayshi manuscript which to compare to. There's nothing there. There is nothing there. We don't have any manuscript from the time of Uthman. Any Quran from the time of Uthman. Remember, they only begin to appear in the 8th century. There's nothing there from the 7th century. Oh, there are Muslims that say there's these little bits of pieces, there's these little bits of pieces. Oh, we can go, and we're going to get into that. We're going to show you. They're going to say by radiocarbon dating, we can show that the Birmingham folios, which is 33 verses, are from the 7th century. Folks, that's for another time. That's for another debate. That's for another talk. Let's just deal with this. This is the whole reason. The reason they didn't do any textual critical analysis, because there was no text to be critical of. There was no text to compare it with. And if you don't have any text to compare it, you're not going to have any textual criticism. There still are none even today. So, folks, finally, from what we have researched and found, we can say that, first of all, the Quran was not created by God at all. The Quran was not sent down to Muhammad between 610 and 632. The Quran was not completed by Uthman in 652. The Quran was changed in the last 1300 years, and the Quran was finally compiled in 1924 and made official in 1985. Thus, the Quran that we have in our hand today is a mere a mere 35 years old. Consequently, many of those who are watching me, and in fact myself as well, were older than the Quran, which makes me feel pretty old. Why are we doing all this, folks? We're casting doubt on the Quran. We're doing so because the claims that Muslims make. But Muslims, you have to make these claims. I understand your problem. You have to say it's been preserved. You have to say that it has always existed. You have to say that it's eternal. You have to say that it cannot be changed. Because the Quran makes that claim. The Quran makes that claim. You have no other choice. So I can understand the dilemma you're in. But folks, we've been casting doubt on it. And I've been going for almost 2 hours now, a little over 2 hours. You can see, putting it all together, I'm only just talking about the Qira'at. We haven't even got into the manuscript material. That's yet to come. That's yet to come. But can you see, if there's this much damage at this level, and this is a popular level. This is why Hatun reminded me over and over again when we were holding up, when we were going to put those Qur'ans up. I said, Hatun, this is not really that damaging. This is not really that damaging. Because you know that it's just talking about dots and vowels. 5 dots and 3 vowels. 5 dots and 3 vowels. Dama, the kasra, and the fatha. That's it. And it's talking about where you want to put them and how they change the meaning. Yes, they do change the meaning. But that's all done in the 8th, 9th, and 10th century. I want to go back to 7th and early 8th century. That's much, much more damaging. I want to go back to that material. Hatun said, no, Jay, you don't understand. What you like is what academics like, and that's true. I like the academic material because it's a lot more damaging, and that's true. And it has a lot more impact for academics. But see, she comes from a Muslim background. She says, Jay, this will destroy every Muslim's faith. Because every Muslim has been told that there is one Quran, and this is it. And that this Quran was the same Quran that Uthman had compiled in 652, the same Quran that Muhammad received from 610 to 632, the same Quran that exists in heaven eternally, with not one letter, not one word, not one dot, not one vowel difference. Every word, every letter in this Quran is exactly the same as that which Uthman compiled, that which was revealed to Muhammad, that which resides in heaven. She says, I grew up believing this. And when I went into that bookstore in North Africa and asked for a Quran, and the first question he asked me, well, which Quran do you want? When I heard that, it just destroyed everything I knew. That's why on a popular level, the level that Muhammad Hijab has to work on, the level that he had to ask that question of Yasir Qadhi, on that level, this destroys everything you know about the Quran, because it shuts down any notion that there is an eternal Quran. It shuts down any notion that the Quran has not been changed. It shuts down any notion that God has guarded his text. No, he hasn't guarded his text. It has been changed. This does not come from heaven. It doesn't even come from Muhammad. In fact, it doesn't even come from Uthman. If these Qurans only begin to appear in the 8th century from 736 up until 905, chosen in 936, and then chosen for the 10 in 1429, and then finally chosen back to the 1 in 1924, and then chosen for the whole world in 1985, can you see this is manipulated by men from the very beginning? From the very beginning it's been manipulated by men. From the very beginning it has been changed by men. From the very beginning it has continued to be changed. And for 1,000 years they've been changing it, and it's only in the last 100 years that they decided to bring it back to 1 again. But folks, here's a book that I just received last week that has 10 examples of the 10 major ones, and you can see example after example. They have it in faded text and in English. You can buy this. It's put out by Bridges. It's called the Bridges translation of the 10 Qira'at of the Noble Quran by Fadl Suleiman. You can go up online and you can order it. Order it, because this is in English so you can understand it. And folks, they're not trying to hide this. They are aware that there are many different Qurans. This is just the Noble 10. This is the creme de la creme, the best of the best according to Yasir Qadhi. But now we know there are 30. Hafs is not even in here. Hafs is not even in here. That's what's fascinating. He's not one of these 10. Folks, I'm so glad I don't have to defend this. I'm so glad I don't have to argue this or debate this. I'm so glad I can just sit back and introduce it to you. Give it out so you have it. And that's why I've spent all this time, almost a little over 2 hours, to bring this to you. It's important that you see it. It's important that you understand it. It's important that you share it. And Muslims who are watching, many of you probably have turned off already. You're probably not even listening to me anymore. But you're going to be asked these questions, Muslim, for those who are listening now. You are going to be asked, what about your Quran? How can you say this is the eternal Quran? This guy, Hafs, died in 796. Didn't even agree with Asim, his stable leader, his reader. Didn't even agree with him. Chosen in 1924. Chosen because the Ottomans chose him for political reasons. Just for political reasons. Please don't say there's only one Quran. There are many Qurans. Please don't say it comes from God. It comes from man. It's nothing more than a book written by man, borrowed from many different sources, bringing it together possibly in the 8th, maybe in the 9th. We're not even sure when it was finally compiled in its final form. That we have not yet concluded. We will. Can you then understand why Muslims, this is not the Word of God. It's not even a Word of God. It's nothing more than the Word of men, written by men, compiled by men, changed by men, manipulated by men, chosen by men, burned by men, sunk into the rivers by men, erased by men, destroyed by men. All of it has to do with man. It all comes back to man. My Bible's not like that. My Bible is written by man. I'm aware of that. But I would never make these claims that it is eternal. Never made that claim. That sent down, no, I wouldn't make that claim either. Complete, yeah, it was complete in its original form. Change, yeah, we even know where it's changed. That's why we're transparent about it. Thank God I don't have to make this claim about my Bible, because it's not the Bible that's the Word of God, though we call it the Word of God. It's Jesus who's the Word of God. Jesus, who was not made by any man, has always existed. He is eternal. He did come down. He has always been consistent. He has never changed. The very thing you're looking for, I have in Jesus Christ. I don't need your Qur'an. I just need Jesus, the Word of God, the eternal Word of God, the unchanging Word of God. We don't argue about him or how many different Jesuses there are. There's only one Jesus. There's not 30 of him or 700 of him. And yet he is the Word of God. Come back to Jesus. He's there waiting for you. God bless you. This is Jay then. Over and out.